The gravel crunched under my boots with every step, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness of the open prairie. Sally Dixon walked ahead of me, her gait brisk, almost impatient, as if she wanted this over with as quickly as possible. Her hands were jammed deep into the pockets of a heavy brown jacket, shoulders hunched forward against a wind that barely existed. She'd called me 3 times yesterday. 3. Not texts, not emails, actual phone calls, insisting that we meet here at the property instead of at my Calgary office. That alone should have been my first red flag. Clients rarely insisted on site meetings before signing paperwork. But she'd been vague over the phone, her voice low and clipped, so I'd agreed. "Thanks for coming out, Mr. Martinez," she said when I caught up to her, though she didn't quite meet my eyes. "No problem," I replied, adjusting my grip on my tablet. "It's a bit of a drive, but nothing I can't handle." "It's more than a bit of a drive," she muttered, as if to herself, before adding in a louder voice, "I appreciate your time." The farmhouse loomed ahead of us, squatting in the middle of a wide, scrubby field like a rotten tooth in an otherwise empty mouth. Its once white paint had surrendered years ago to the elements, leaving behind weather-beaten gray boards. The roof sagged on one side. 2 windows on the second floor gaped like sockets where glass should be, their black emptiness somehow more unsettling than if they'd been broken. I'd seen plenty of derelict structures in my time. Demolition is never glamorous, just work, dust, and the smell of decay. But this place had an edge to it, an almost tangible weight that pressed down on the air. Sally kept glancing at the building, her eyes flicking toward it in quick, nervous movements, like she was expecting something to happen. "Standard demo job, right?" I asked, swiping my tablet to pull up the preliminary contract. "Clear the structure, haul away debris, prep the land for whatever's next." She stopped walking abruptly, turning to face me. "There are some conditions." The way she said it made my stomach tighten. I watched her dig through an oversized leather purse, her fingers trembling slightly. Behind us, Dennis and Teresa were unloading survey gear from the back of my truck. Dennis, all fresh work boots and boundless enthusiasm, was grinning like we were about to film an episode of some construction reality show. Before I could ask what she meant by conditions, Sally pulled out a battered spiral-bound notebook. Its cover looked like it had been through the wash a few times, warped cardboard, edges curling. Across the front, written in permanent marker, were the words, "T. Wood, Site Observations." "You need to read this," she said, her voice quieter now, more serious. "And you need to follow the rules." Dennis, overhearing, thought, "Rules? Like safety protocols? We've got those covered." Sally's brittle chuckle was nothing like amusement. "Not exactly." I took the notebook from her, feeling its odd weight, not heavy, but somehow significant. Inside, the pages were cramped with handwriting, the ink faded in some places, smudged in others. The first few entries were mundane enough: measurements, material estimates, standard worksite notes. But then by the 3rd page, the tone shifted. The handwriting got tighter, the sentences shorter. One note caught my eye: strange knocking sound from basement, 4:12 p.m., windless day. By the 10th page, the entries were downright bizarre. Saw woman in red dress at Treeline. Gone when I looked again. I looked up sharply. "This is a joke, right?" Dennis leaned over my shoulder and read aloud, "Never work before 6:45 a.m. or after 6:55 p.m. The property doesn't like it." He grinned. "Come on, this is gold. Are we being filmed right now?" Teresa didn't laugh. She stood several paces away, eyes locked on the farmhouse. There was a strange stiffness in her posture, the kind you see in people who've just realized they might be in the wrong place at the wrong time. "You know this place?" I asked her. Her gaze didn't leave the house. Everyone around here knows about it. The Hartwell place. Sally flinched at the name, so quickly most people would have missed it. I thought you said your family owned it, I pressed. We do now, she said. It's complicated. She reached into her jacket pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. These are the rules Tucker documented. If you want the job, you follow them. Non-negotiable. I unfolded it. The paper was clean, crisp, a sharp contrast to the weathered notebook. The 6 rules were typed neatly. Never arrive before 6:45 a.m. or stay after 6:55 p.m. Don't go in the basement alone. If you see a woman in a red dress, don't acknowledge her. Keep all tools locked up overnight. They move. Don't remove anything from the property except designated demolition material. If you hear your name called from inside the house when you're outside, don't answer. Dennis let out a bark of laughter. Is this for real? This is like something out of a horror flick. Tucker didn't think it was funny, Sally said, her voice low. He left 3 weeks into a 6-week job. Just left. His truck, his tools, everything's still here. Haven't heard from him since. That made me pause. No contractor walks away from their gear. Tools cost more than most people's cars, and trucks aren't exactly cheap either. Where's his stuff now? I asked. In the barn, she replied. I haven't touched it. Her arms were wrapped tight around herself now, though the air was mild. I went back to flipping through Tucker's notebook. If the man was anything, he was meticulous. Every strange incident was time-stamped, weather conditions noted, even wind speed on some entries. One page stood out. July 15th, heard Dennis in basement calling for help. I glanced over at Dennis, standing very much beside me in the warm afternoon light. Teresa finally spoke. These stories, I've been hearing versions of them since I was a kid. The Hartwells, they were, she trailed off, her eyes hardening. Let's just say they weren't the kind of neighbors you dropped in on unannounced. Something in her tone made the air feel colder, the kind of chill that has nothing to do with temperature. From somewhere far off, a crow called, sharp, metallic, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw movement in one of the upstairs windows of the farmhouse. Just a flicker of shadow. Too quick to be sure. But when I looked back at Sally, her eyes were already fixed on that same window. The barn sat 100 yards behind the farmhouse, half hidden by tall grass and the jagged skeletons of old fence posts. Its roof sagged even worse than the house, and one of the double doors hung at a crooked angle, the hinges protesting every gust of wind. Sally led us there without another word. I noticed she kept glancing over her shoulder, not toward us, but toward the farmhouse, as though she needed to make sure it stayed put. The smell hit me first. Old wood, motor oil, and the stale scent of damp earth. Inside, dust motes swirled in the thin shafts of light cutting through the warped siding. In the far corner, beneath a canvas tarp, sat Tucker's truck, an older Ford, but clean, or at least it had been before weeks of dust settled over it. The driver's door was locked. Nearby was a pile of tools, neatly arranged as if Tucker had set them down for the night and planned to pick them up again in the morning. Drills, saws, levels, boxes of nails, thousands of dollars worth of equipment. Everything coated in the same uniform layer of dust, undisturbed. No one's touched it? I asked. I told you, Sally said. Not a thing. Dennis crouched to inspect a heavy-duty drill, his grin returning. Man, he had the good stuff. If he's not coming back, maybe? No, Sally's voice cracked like a whip. Dennis straightened instantly. You don't take anything from this property that isn't debris, she reminded us. That was Rule 5. Dennis raised his hands in mock surrender, but I saw the flicker of irritation in his eyes. We left the barn and returned to the farmhouse. Up close, the place was worse. Paint curled away from the siding in long strips. The porch steps sagged dangerously under my weight. "This is your work area," I said, pointing to Teresa and Dennis. "Let's start outside, clear the yard, then move in." The first few hours passed in a strange quiet. No cars, no distant highway noise, no wind through the grass. Just the rhythmic scrape of shovels and the dull thud of boards hitting the burn pile. I kept catching myself glancing at my watch, 1:15, 2:47, 4:02, without knowing why. At 5:30, I called a break. Teresa brought out bottled water from the cooler, and we sat on the tailgate of my truck. "You've done jobs like this before?" she asked. "Plenty," I said. "Never had a client hand me a ghost story first thing in the morning, though." She didn't smile. "It's not just a story." Before I could ask what she meant, Dennis's voice called out from the far side of the house. "Hey, you guys gotta see this." We followed the sound, rounding the corner, and froze. A woman stood at the edge of the tree-line. She was facing us, though her head was tilted slightly downward, as if she was looking at something in the grass. Her dress was deep red, the fabric moving just enough to catch the fading light. She didn't move. "Is that?" Dennis started, but I cut him off. "Don't," I said sharply. "The rules. If you see a woman in a red dress, don't acknowledge her." Teresa had gone pale. "We should go inside." The woman didn't follow as we retreated. By the time we reached the porch, she was gone. I checked my watch. 6:42 p.m. "We're packing up," I said. "Now." Dennis groaned but didn't argue. We locked up the tools, every hammer, every wrench, every tape measure, inside the truck's toolbox. The air felt heavier as the minute hand inched towards 6:55. By the time we pulled onto the dirt road, the sun was sinking fast. That night, I couldn't shake the image of the woman in the red dress. She hadn't moved, hadn't even seemed to breathe, but there was something about her posture, a tension like a coil wound too tight. The next morning, we arrived at exactly 6:50 a.m., parking just inside the property line. The air was crisp, and the farmhouse seemed different. Not better, just watching. We worked inside that day. The floors were warped, the wallpaper peeling in sheets. Every room smelled faintly of rot. In the kitchen, Dennis pried loose a section of flooring to check for structural damage. "Hey boss," he said, "you hear that?" I paused. There, faint but distinct, was a tapping sound from beneath us. "Probably an animal," I said. Dennis leaned closer to the hole. "Doesn't sound like an animal." The tapping stopped. Then, in the sudden silence, a single knock echoed up from below. Teresa's eyes met mine. "Rule 2, she said quietly. "Don't go in the basement alone." We went together, the three of us. The basement stairs were narrow, steep, the wood soft with age. The air was colder down there, thick with the smell of damp concrete. We scanned the space with our flashlights, old shelving, a rusted furnace, piles of lumber. Nothing moved. "See," Dennis said. A voice cut through the dark. "Help me." It was Dennis's voice. But Dennis was standing right beside me. The voice faded into the damp air, leaving a hollow silence. My flashlight beam cut across Dennis's face, pale, tense, jaw clenched tight. He was breathing through his nose, sharp and fast. "That," Teresa's voice shook. "That was you. That was your voice." Dennis didn't answer. His eyes darted around the basement like he expected something to lunge at him. We stood there for a long moment, the cold settling into my bones. Finally I said, "We're done down here." No one argued. Back upstairs, the sunlight filtering through the grimy windows felt almost unreal, too bright for the weight pressing on my chest. I tried to focus on the work, pulling up old floorboards, stripping ruined drywall, but my mind kept drifting back to that voice. At lunch, I caught Dennis staring at the basement door. Don't, I told him. I wasn't gonna, he said, but it didn't sound convincing. The afternoon passed slowly. By 5:45 p.m., we were outside clearing debris into the dump trailer. Teresa was stacking boards when she froze mid-motion, her gaze locked on something behind me. I turned. The woman in red stood in the same spot at the treeline. Only this time, she was closer. Still motionless, still facing us, her head tilted just enough for the light to catch in her hair. The air around her shimmered faintly, like heat rising from asphalt, except the temperature had dropped. Dennis shifted like he was about to call out. Don't, I snapped. She's not moving, he said, voice tight. She's not supposed to, I replied. Load the last of it. Now. We worked fast, the air thick with unspoken tension. When I glanced back one last time before locking the trailer, she was gone. 6:50 p.m., we were in the truck, pulling out. That night I barely slept. The house felt too quiet, my phone too close. I kept seeing her in my mind, closer, sharper, like she'd stepped forward without me noticing. The next day, we arrived at 6:48. Sally was waiting near the barn, arms folded. You saw her again, she said. I didn't bother asking how she knew. She was closer. Sally's face tightened. Then you need to be careful. They say the more you see her, the harder it is to stop. I wanted to ask who they were, but I didn't. Inside the farmhouse, Dennis worked on removing a section of wall while Teresa and I cataloged the materials for disposal. It was almost noon when it happened again. From outside, faint but distinct, Martinez. My name. I froze. Teresa looked at me, eyes wide. Rule 6, she whispered. Don't answer. The voice came again, slightly louder. Martinez. It was exactly my father's voice. I hadn't heard it in years. I turned toward the window, the sunlight making my eyes water. The yard was empty. I didn't answer. By 2 p.m., Dennis was in the kitchen when we heard him yell. Teresa and I ran in, but he wasn't looking at us. The woman in red was standing in the doorway to the hall. Close. Her head was tilted further now, her face partly in shadow, but I could see her mouth move, slowly, deliberately. No sound came out. Out, I ordered. We left every tool where it was. Outside, the sky had gone the color of pewter, heavy clouds rolling in from the west. At the truck, Dennis's hands were shaking. She was inside. She moved. Sally was waiting by the road when we drove out. She didn't ask. She just said, it's starting sooner than it should. The rain started just after we left the property. By the time I got home, it was steady, the kind that soaks you through before you can get your coat off. I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone on the counter, half expecting Sally to call. She didn't. That night I dreamed of the farmhouse. Not the way it looked in daylight, but under a pale, silver light. The boards wet and glistening, the windows black holes. In the dream, the front door was open, and inside, the woman in red was standing at the base of the stairs, one hand resting on the railing. She smiled. I woke up before dawn, my heart pounding. When I pulled up to the site at 6:46 a.m., Dennis was already there, leaning against his truck with a coffee. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes. Couldn't sleep, he said when I asked. Figured I'd get a head start. The rule hit me like a hammer. Never before 6:45 a.m. We were inside that window now. It's fine, Dennis said when I told him. We're here after 6:45, aren't we? It was 6:46, yes, but close enough to make me uneasy. We got to work. The rain had softened the ground, and mud clung to our boots as we carried out debris. Around 10:15, Teresa went to fetch a crowbar from the truck. She was back in under a minute, pale-faced. The toolbox was open, she said. I frowned. I locked it yesterday. I know, she said. Half the tools are gone. We searched the truck, the yard, even the barn. Nothing. Rule 4, Teresa murmured. They move. Dennis shook his head. Tools don't just walk away. Someone's screwing with us. I wanted to agree. I wanted to believe it was just theft. But I kept remembering the neat, untouched pile of Tucker's gear in the barn, and how he'd walked away without it. By mid-afternoon, the missing tools were back. Every single one, arranged in a perfect line along the front porch. No mud, no signs they'd been used. Dennis swore under his breath. Okay, that's not funny. We didn't touch them until we were ready to leave. At 6:30 p.m., we locked every last piece inside the truck again. I checked the lock twice. On the drive out, Dennis stared out the window. She was in the kitchen again, he said suddenly. When I went in for the level. Didn't say anything. Just stood there. Did you acknowledge her? I asked. He didn't answer. The next day, we were slow to get started. Teresa was jumpy, glancing at every window as if expecting to see a flash of red. Around 4 p.m., Dennis went back into the house alone to pull the last section of flooring in the living room. The minutes stretched. 10, 15. Then I heard it, faint at first, then louder. Help me. It was Dennis's voice. From the basement. Teresa's eyes locked on mine. He's in there. Rule 2, I said automatically. Don't go in alone. We went together. The basement was darker than I remembered. The light from the small windows barely touched the far corners. I called his name. No answer. We moved deeper. Something shifted in the shadows near the furnace. Dennis. I stepped forward. He was standing with his back to us, motionless. Hey, I said, crossing the space. I touched his shoulder. Turned. His eyes were open, but he wasn't looking at me. His face was pale, his lips moving soundlessly. Then, in a voice that didn't sound like his own, he whispered, "She's in the walls." Teresa grabbed my arm. We need to go. We hauled him upstairs. Outside, the sky had gone dark, though it was barely 5 p.m. The air smelled like rain and something else, something metallic. Dennis didn't speak the rest of the day. That night, Sally called. You need to finish soon, she said. The longer you're there, the more it takes. I asked her what it is. She didn't answer. The wind howled outside as I finished the last of my shift. The cold seeped through the thin walls, biting at my hands even with gloves on. I could hear the others packing up their tools, their voices low, almost whispering. No one wanted to talk about what had happened the night before. The foreman gave me a nod, his eyes lingering a moment longer than usual, as if searching for something in my face. You heading back into town tonight? He asked. Yeah, I said, slinging my bag over my shoulder. Don't take the gravel road, he muttered. Stick to the highway. I didn't ask why. I just nodded and stepped outside. The sun was sinking behind the trees, casting long shadows over the snow. My truck was already coated in frost. As I started the engine, I glanced in the rearview mirror, just a habit. But for a moment, I thought I saw movement in the treeline. A figure, half hidden, watching. I blinked and it was gone. The drive back was quiet. Too quiet. Even the radio seemed reluctant to play, the signal crackling in and out. Miles of empty road stretched ahead, the sky fading from pale gold to black. Every now and then, the wind would push against the truck, making it sway slightly. By the time I reached the motel, the parking lot was empty except for my vehicle and a single dark SUV I didn't recognize. Its windows were tinted. No lights inside. I went to my room, locked the door, and drew the curtains. For a long time, I just stood there, listening. The heater rattled in the corner. Somewhere outside, a door slammed. I told myself it was nothing. Just another night in rural Alberta. But deep down, I knew the job had changed something. The rules here weren't just about work, they were about survival. And I wasn't sure I wanted to learn the rest.